There's a Guinness World Record for everything, and I mean everything. There's a record for the most metal eaten by a human. There's a record for the most people brushing their teeth simultaneously. And there's even a record for the hardest kick to the groin. Now, alongside these, which may seem a little bit absurd, there are also records for accomplishments that test the physical and mental limits of humans who do amazing things. Like one of the most recent records set for the longest cooking marathon at 93 hours and 11 minutes by a Nigerian called Hilda Bassi. All of these records are tracked, reviewed, judged, and documented for posterity by an entity called Guinness World Records. And if you want to set a new record, you have to go through them. So today's explainer is all about helping you understand the universe of the Guinness World Records and how you can potentially be a part of it. So let's get into it. The best place to start is understanding the origin of the Guinness World Records. Now, believe it or not, the Guinness World Records only came into existence because two guys wanted to settle an argument. In the early 1950s, Sir Hugh Beaver, who was the managing director of the Guinness Brewery at the time, argued with a friend about how fast a certain kind of bird could fly. At the time, there was no real way to settle the dispute and no way to know for sure. So Sir Beaver decided there had to be a reference publication, like a book of facts and figures, that would be an authority on record-breaking achievements in the world. Now, the obvious question is what that idea for a book of facts and figures had to do with Guinness, aside from the fact that Sir Beaver was an executive at Guinness. And the answer is that Guinness decided to promote this book of facts and figures that was going to be created because the logic was that the book would come in handy for settling arguments at pubs. And so it was essentially a marketing play by Guinness to create the book and place them at pubs so friends could argue and then settle those arguments all while drinking Guinness. Two brothers called Norris and Ross McWhirter were hired in 1954 to lead the research and compile this book of facts and figures. And in November of 1954, they set up a company called Guinness Superlatives and got down to business. By early 1955, the first ever Guinness Book of Records was published, and it went from being a random fun idea to being an incredible success, with 187,000 copies sold in the very first year. And the popularity of the book has pretty much grown ever since. And so to the question, how do you make it into the book itself? How do you set a Guinness World Record? It's pretty simple actually. You apply. Now, of course, applying is the simplest part. You actually have to go on and perform whatever task it is you want to achieve, like say the most push-ups in an hour, or provide the evidence of whatever record you want to establish, like say having the longest fingernails in the world. To set a record, there are 6 key rules that apply before that record can be recognized. First, it has to be measurable and not subjective. So you can't set a record for being the most loyal friend in the world because loyalty isn't exactly measurable. And you also can't set a record for being the most beautiful person in the world because again, beauty can't exactly be measured. Second, the record has to be breakable because as the cliche goes, records are meant to be broken. Basically, someone else must be able to challenge that record. Third, it has to be standardized, which means there have to be clear parameters and conditions that a challenger can follow. And fourth, the record has to be verifiable. You have to be able to provide evidence that you have broken that record. You just can't say you did a thing. You also have to be able to show, of course, that you did it as well. Fifth, the record must be based on just one variable or superlative, like doing something for the longest time, rather than being the tallest person to do something for the longest time. So while you can set a record for the world's longest cooking marathon, you can't set the record for the world's longest cooking marathon by the tallest woman. Having more than one variable, in this case longest and tallest, means that your record attempts will not be eligible. And finally, if your record suggestion is new, that is, nobody has ever attempted that record, then Guinness World Records will need to set a minimum requirement for you to match before establishing it as a record. So imagine if nobody had set a record for a cooking marathon. You can't show up and cook for 5 minutes and then declare yourself a record holder. And so to recap, for records that don't yet exist, Guinness World Records will have to set a benchmark before certifying it as a world record. And so if your record attempt matches all of these 6 criteria, then of course you can give it a shot. But you should also know that Guinness has rules preventing certain record attempts. For instance, records that harm or endanger animals are banned, as are records about excessive eating or consumption of alcohol, which makes sense because you don't want people getting hurt in the process of setting records for consuming too much alcohol or eating unhealthy amounts of food. In addition to that, there are also age limits for certain types of records as well, with people under 16 barred from attempting or holding certain records. So if you're clear on what the rules are and also clear on the record that you want to attempt to break, then the first step to setting a Guinness World Record is checking to see if that record already exists. The next step is to apply to Guinness World Records. But, and this part is important, you have to wait to confirm that your application has been accepted before you attempt to set that record. Now, this waiting period can take up to 12 weeks because Guinness World Records received over 1,000 applications every week. If the application is ultimately accepted, you receive specific guidelines on rules to guide your attempt and also guidelines on how to document evidence of your attempt so that it can be verified. Now, this part is also incredibly important because over 50% of submissions of attempted records are rejected because the evidence was not recorded properly or was considered insufficient. Once you're clear on the guidelines and the process for documenting the evidence, all that's left is to prep for your attempt and carry it out. But it doesn't end there because you also have to get all the evidence together and send it over to the records management team at Guinness World Records to verify the attempt. And that process of verification can also take another 12 weeks. Now, I know this entire process might sound stressful, but that hasn't stopped thousands of people from giving it a shot. In 2022 alone, there were 56,000 applications to set new world records. And in total, 7,300 new records were set and of course documented by Guinness World Records. It may have started as a random idea to help settle disputes back in the 1950s. But today, Guinness World Records has evolved into being a global diary that tracks phenomenal achievements by humans who are doing officially amazing things, with over 62,000 records set so far. The Guinness World Records itself has become a hugely popular brand, and fittingly, it has also set a Guinness World Record, the record for being the most frequently stolen book from libraries across the world.